Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Aishwaryatube and today we will be completing yet another polyfill in the polyfill series and also in the front-end interview prep series. I've already created a polyfill for map, so if you haven't watched that video, I'll just plug it in here. You can watch map polyfill after you're done with filter polyfill. So when it comes to filter polyfill, let's first understand how filter works, like how filter as a method in JavaScript works, and then we can delve into the polyfill of filter. So let's get started with today's video. So for filter, I'll just take an example of numbers. Okay, so I'll take numbers from 1 to 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so why is filter actually used? When you need to filter out your array, when you need a new array with certain filtered out values, that is the time we use the filter function. So let's say we have numbers from 1 to 10, but we only need even numbers. So if you only need even numbers, that means you have to filter out all the even numbers, or you can also say that you don't need the odd numbers, right? So that is when you use the filter function. So let's see how filter function works in action here. So what you can do right now is you can just say numbers dot filter, okay, and it takes a callback function and then it returns something. So how this works is, if it returns true, by the way, this callback function is working for each element. So inside this callback function, we take the element itself, which is num, then we take the index. So we can just call it idx. Now I'm calling this num and idx. You can call it anything, but what you need to remember is num represents each element of the array. So this callback function will work for each element of the array, and idx is the index of each element of the array. Okay, here when you're using it, you can also call it number, you can also call it index, that's your call. Okay, so for simplicity reasons, I'm just using num and idx. So this callback function, this callback function will run for each element of the array, and if this callback function returns true, if it returns true, then that element will be included in your final array. As I said, filter function will also return another array, right? So if this callback function returns true, then in your final array, that element will be present. So now if I want even numbers, then we know one mathematical equation, that all even numbers are completely divisible by 2. So if the remainder is 0, then that element will be included in a final array. So we can just say, if num modulus 2 is equal to 0, okay, which means if the remainder is 0 after your number is divided by 2, then this will return true. Okay, this condition will return true, and when this condition returns true, that is the time your element will be added into your array. Okay, so I can just say, I'll open this and I'll just say const even numbers, and just to show you all how even numbers looks like, I will print even numbers, and let's run this. Okay, so you can see that earlier I had a numbers array which went from 1 to 10. Now I have a numbers array, but it only has numbers from 2 to 10, and all of these are even numbers. That's because I filtered out even numbers. So whenever this statement is true, you will get those values. If this statement is false, you will not get those values. So for example, for number 3, num modulus 2 will be 1, it won't be equal to 0. So this statement will be false for number 3. That's why number 3 is not included in the final array. Okay, so I hope you have understood how filter function works in JavaScript, because it's very important to understand how the function works. Once that is understood, then it's very easy to develop the polyfill. Just one more thing which I forgot to mention here is that the callback function also takes a third parameter. It takes index, but it also takes a third parameter, which is the array itself. So in this case, the array on which we are iterating is the numbers array. So the callback function's third parameter is the numbers array. Okay, so yeah, even if I use this, I think again I'll run and show you, it will work the same way. So with this in place, we can finally get started with the polyfill for filter. Now when it comes to the polyfill of filter, as I said, to design any polyfill, you need to ask yourself some basic simple questions. Now these are simple questions, and I know for a simple polyfill like filter, these questions are not really needed, but once you have this habit of answering these questions, any difficult polyfills, for example developing polyfills of promises, or developing your own promises, right, polyfill for building a promise, all of those difficult questions will be easier for you once you get in the habit of answering these questions. That's why I'm starting with these questions right at the beginning, so that you can develop this habit. So the first question that you need to ask yourself is, what is your polyfill about? Okay, I'll again write these questions, and this is the same way I have taught you map polyfill as well, so I'm just following the same practice here. So what is the polyfill about? Okay, or what is the type of the polyfill, I can say. Okay, what is the type of the polyfill? Okay, what is the type of the polyfill? Which means I'm designing the filter polyfill. What is it exactly? Is it an object? Is it an array? What is it? It's a function, right? So the type of the polyfill is a function. It's not a promise, it's a function. Okay, now the next thing is, on which object is this promise invoked? On which object is this function invoked, or is this polyfill invoked? Okay, very simple. On which object? Right now filter cannot be used on objects, filter cannot be used on promises, filter can only be used on arrays. So array is the object on which the filter function is invoked. So we have to change the array prototype. So I think with these two questions we can get started with the polyfill at least. So we know now that we have to change the array prototype. So we will just say array.prototype dot my filter. Okay, see, array's prototype already has filter. It already has filter. Now what you need to do is you need to create another function called as my filter, which will be the polyfill of your filter function. So what will this be equal to? As I said, we are developing a function, so this will be a function. Correct? This will be a function. Now the next thing that you need to ask yourself is, what is returned by your polyfill? What is returned by your polyfill? What exactly is returned by your polyfill? So we know that filter function returns a new array, right? So you will have to return a new array. If that's the case, then you will have to create a new array in your function, maybe create like an empty array in your function, and finally return that empty array. I'm calling this temp, you can call it result, you can call it filtered array, anything that you like, okay, but I'm calling it temp. So this is out of the way. Now the next thing that you need to know, this is a function, right? But what are we dealing with? Like, what is this function accepting, right? What are the values that this function is accepting? So what are the parameters that the function is accepting, or that the polyfill is accepting, just to be more precise. So what are the parameters? If you check a filter function, you will realize that this function is accepting another function, right? This filter function is accepting another function. So what kind of function is this? In JavaScript, we call it a callback function. So can we just say CB? This function will have a CB function, like this function is accepting a callback function, and we know that this callback function will somewhere be called in this function. Somewhere we will be calling this callback function, okay? And by the nature of filter, we also know that callback function will be called for each element of the array, okay? So now when I say callback function is called for each element of the array, we will have to iterate over the array. So to iterate over the array, we will use a simple for loop. So for I is equal to 0, I is less than, ideally I should have been less than array.length, right, on nums.length, numbers.length. But do we have access to that array? That is the biggest question. So in my last lesson, like in the map polyfill video, we discussed that if we have an object, okay, and given any object, if we invoke a function, any function on that object, then we actually have access to this object via the this keyword. via the this keyword. So using this keyword, if we use this keyword anywhere inside this function, then this keyword will point to the object. Okay, if we use this keyword anywhere inside the function, then this keyword will point to the object, because this function is invoked on this object. That is how simple JavaScript works, which means now if numbers is my array and I am invoking my filter on numbers, then if I use the this keyword, anywhere inside my filter function, then this will be pointing to numbers. Okay, this will be pointing to my numbers object. Simple. So we will use the same logic here. So instead of saying array.length or numbers.length, I will just say this.length and I++. This is a very simple for loop. Now inside this for loop, I need to call my callback function. But before that, the result of my callback function will, like if you check the function here, what will be the result of my callback function? It's not returning another number. Like in case of map, it was returning another number. Here it is returning true or false. The result will always be true or false. So I will just use an if statement, and I will just say if this is true, only then you push inside temp. Okay, if this is true, only then you push inside temp. So temp.push. Okay, now we have to work a little here. So if CB, so first of all we need to give parameters to this CB, right? So callback function, what does it take? It takes the element. In this case, the element will be this of I, correct? Because this is pointing to the numbers array, I is the index, so we can get the element using the index. Then the second parameter to the callback function is idx, which in this case is the index. And the third parameter is the numbers array itself, which in this case is this. So we have properly called our callback function. So this is done. This callback function, after we call it, will either return true or false. If it is true, only then we need to push that particular element inside temp. So what do we need to push? We need to push that element. So we can get that element again using this of I. Otherwise we are not pushing anything, and finally we are returning the temp array. So I will just save this, and instead of my filter, I will use my filter. Okay, let's run this, and we are getting the same result, which is expected. We do want the same functionality, and I think this is it. But if you were a fresher, then this would have been accepted. But if you are a senior professional, then there are a few validations that you need to make. By the way, the answer to this is the callback function, which I forgot to write. Apart from that, as I mentioned, if you are a professional, senior software engineer, then you need to validate some inputs. Now in this case, you need to validate your inputs, and in this case your inputs are the callback function, right? So you need to validate that your callback function is actually a function, because just imagine if your callback function was not a function, then you will get an error here, right? So you don't want erroneous code. That's why before starting with anything else, you're making sure that anything that your my filter function accepts is actually a function, if that makes sense. So for that, you can just put an if statement saying if type of callback is not equal to function. Okay, so if you realize that the type of your callback is not a function, you need not go ahead. Here itself, you throw a new type error, and you can just say is not a function. Okay, so here itself you will throw this error, and all of this won't be executed. Basically it will still work fine. So if I run this, it will still work fine. So yeah, this was about the filter function. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. In the next video, we will be discussing about the reduce polyfill. We will be discussing how reduce works, like reduce function works, because I feel map and filter functions are exploited a lot, because we do use them in our day-to-day coding, even when we are coding production ready application, we do use filter and map readily. But when it comes to reduce is one such function which is really useful, but it doesn't come to our mind in one shot. Like, you don't think of reduce, right? You think of some other things. You think of maybe chaining map and filter, but you don't think of using reduce directly, because it's not as exploited as map and filter. So in our next lesson, in our next video, we will be learning about how reduce works and also about reduce polyfill. So stay tuned for that. And if you like this particular video, and if you like the way I taught, and if you have understood everything, please make sure to like this video so that YouTube understands that this is valuable content. Please drop a comment as to what I can improve, what you liked, what you didn't like, if you want me to change something, change the pace or whatever. So just to make sure to just comment and let me know how it's going on, because your comments will keep me encouraged to create such videos and to complete this playlist. And that's all for today. Please make sure that you subscribe before going, and I'll see you next time. Till then, take care of yourself. Bye.